Well, now that we're more or less done with that part, if you don't mind, I would still like to ask you some questions just about the story in general, since we've more or less covered the mechanics, the cosmic ladder of the DC universe, all of that. I just, I'd like to talk to you about your story. Can we do that?
That would be great.
The Presence, again, we're going to revisit him. He's seen as a righteous and just God throughout a lot of the DC universe. You know, obviously he's got a lot of worshippers and stuff like that, but then there's also people like the Spectre and the Phantom Stranger who come to mind. Now, these are two beings who are very committed to righteousness, basically, to doing the right thing, to keeping things in order, to the Phantom Stranger, I think, is supposed to be a representation of basically God's mercy, while the Spectre is a representation of God's judgment. These are very New Testament type stuff. It's an idea of a good God. But throughout a lot of Lucifer, he's painted as a villain. He's painted as a very darker God. Like, oh, you don't see this side of God. This side of God's freaking crazy. You know what I mean? like, you got comments from Elaine about how their family is horribly dysfunctional. Lucifer made a snide comment about how stabbing his son with a sword was nothing compared to the crap that the Presence had put him through. And what I'm interested in is, do you think Lucifer is a more accurate look at DC's gods? The lower beings like the Spectre and the Phantom Stranger just don't understand the full picture? Or do you think the story's sort of told from Lucifer's perspective? It's his story, and so he might be demonizing things a little bit. Which is the more accurate portrayal?
Well, I mean, it's an interesting question. I think one of the reasons that we identify with Lucifer in many stories about the devil in general, sort of beyond just this comic, is we identify with the rebellious son, right? We identify with the person who has an overbearing father, who has so many rules and is harsh, is a harsh disciplinarian. And I think that that some of Lucifer, is certainly his point of view. I think that it's a very different thing to consider the idea of God in the context of your dad. Also, though, like, I think that there's, some, like, I think that it's just a very different way of looking at that story as a family story. And I think that it yields sort of different results. I would not say, however, that I feel that, certainly Lucifer is not the harshest portrayal of the Presence in the DC universe. I cast your mind back to Hellblazer, in which the Annunciation was portrayed as the Presence sending Gabriel to literally rape Mary. So, really, I feel like, it sort of sits in the middle in terms of portrayals of the Presence.
You're saying the beings who follow him, like, the various Christians, the Spectre, the Phantom Stranger, they're right, but Lucifer's not wrong. It's just a different perspective. He's God's son, and it gives their relationship a different context, right?
Yes. I think that from a personal point of view, I think you put a story out there, and then, the reader judges the characters in it too. And so some people may find the Presence to be misunderstood in the run of Lucifer, looking at, at its actions, and maybe, feeling as though nobody really was sympathetic enough. To me, you portray characters and you don't necessarily cast them into roles as, this person's good or this person's bad, or this mythological and monstrous being is good. You try and sort of get at the kind of story you want to tell with them and the kind of way that they approach the world. And whether or not that seems like a positive thing, you have a being with immense, immense power that does immensely cruel things. And, but that is part of, to a certain extent, that is part of what gods are able to do, right? And what they are. I think what Lucifer does is tempt us to think about the Presence in moral terms that you would think of another human. And to do that opens a can of worms.
There was something I found interesting about Lucifer's last chat with the Presence, actually, and he doesn't seem to think the thing sitting currently on God's throne is the Presence, and like you said, that'll be up to the next writer to find out. But he seems like almost disdainful about, which I thought was interesting. So since we're talking about the Lucifer and his relationship with his father, just curious, was that a sign of respect there for a moment where he's like, "You're not my dad"? Like, what were your what do you think about that?
I mean, I think that when you are a being like Lucifer, who has, defined himself in large part in opposition to somebody else, right? Lucifer's defined himself in opposition to the Presence for an enormous amount of time. And one of the things that I thought was really interesting about killing the Presence was leaving that vacuum. Like, what does that mean for him? How do you define yourself as Lucifer? Who are you if there's no God? And how much of that sort of how much of the stuff that you have relied upon someone else caring about must you then care about? Mike Carey talked about when he was, during his run on Lucifer, the idea of leaving home, the idea of, becoming your own independent self. And I thought a lot about the mirror story to that being the story about coming home when you've been away and falling sort of back into your old habits and your old relationships and your old patterns. But the other story in that is the story of coming home, after your parents are gone, right? And who are you then, when you've always thought of yourself as so-and-so's son or so-and-so's daughter, like, who are you without them? And I think that a lot of this story is Lucifer trying to figure that out. He's a difficult character to write because he's had so many things. He has been in charge of hell. He has run a piano bar. He has rejected the throne of heaven, and he has walked out of creation. What is left for him to want? And so, part of the story for me is figuring that out. Like, because here is a variable, that when it changes an enormous amount about him.
Yeah, Lucifer's entire relationship with his father is just so confusing. I mean, at the end, does he even know if he wants the Presence there or not, or if he wants him alive or not, or if he's going to be dead, he might as well be the one to kill him? If he did kill him, would he feel upset that he wasn't around anymore? It's just, does Lucifer even really know what he wants throughout this entire ordeal?
I think it's very hard for him to access those questions. And so I think he knows what he wants sort of moment to moment, but I don't think he is good at acknowledging, let's say, the parts of him that do, for instance, miss his father.
So Lucifer's struggle has always been one of free will. Theologians and philosophers have debated for centuries about whether doing what you want is possible with an omnipotent, omniscient God around. Lucifer, I think it's pretty clear he doesn't think so.
Well, I mean, I think he left. To me, one of the questions was why come back, right? Why come back at all? Why, and even if it is an accident that brought you back, why stay back? And I think that he left obviously because it was the only way to have free will. And so out there, beyond creation, he had free will. However, he was made by the Presence. He is a creation of the Presence, and what he wants most of all is to be his own creation, and that's not possible. No matter whether, even if he can have, even having free will, he is still made of, the Presence's, made by the Presence's will, made of, whatever the Presence used to make him like. When you think about, children, like when you think about the idea of DNA and you think about the idea of like, how much are we our biological destiny, right? I think that to me, the thing he could never have and can never have is freedom from that. And now that he has free will, to me, that is what haunts him.
Okay, I was curious. and I don't know how much say you have over this, but I was curious. There are like superheroes and other beings and stuff that exist in parallel worlds that are directly tied to the presence, and that some of them get orders directly from the presence. What do you think might happen if the crisis in heaven isn't dealt with? And even if it is dealt with, someone still needs to sit on the throne and keep creation moving. We know Lucifer doesn't want the job. We know Elaine doesn't want the job. Who would we put up to have immeasurable power in those circumstances?
Well, I mean, the throne of hell has had a high turnover since Lucifer's been gone. A lot of people have sat on the throne of hell. So I'm sure that there are going to be a lot of contenders for the throne of heaven. And as I was saying before, there's an argument to be made that you don't need to worry about it because you have Elaine sort of with her whole non-interference policy, like 2 universes removed, making sure everything is more or less okay. So, it depends on terms of the level of the crisis. However, I love the idea of sort of a evil presence coming in and giving really bad orders to people who previously only been getting good orders, because there's a really wonderful story there. Sadly, I would be very surprised if we got it, but it would be really fun.
I think in the past, DC has not been very open to the idea of crossovers between like DC and Vertigo very often. And I understand that there's definitely a point to be made there. Vertigo is typically, it's got a very different theme to it. It's much more, I don't know if serious is the right word, but maybe like ground. It's a different story. It really is. So it makes sense that they emphasize that they're the same place, but they don't cross over very often. And so I doubt that we'll get some story about it. The Spectre going absolutely berserk because the Presence is a jerk now. But I mean, it's an interesting thing to consider at least.
Sure, and then there's another argument that says, there's some angels and they're sorting it out for those people, and that's why they don't know what's happening over here. There's some angels who are like, don't, it's fine, everything is great.
The Phantom Stranger, he doesn't actually talk with God, he just, he has a middleman, like an angel that goes back and forth. The angel's like, shut up, everything's fine, nothing is wrong, trust me.
I think there's an argument that Elaine was more or less keeping things functional from her sort of outsider status, that she had all of that power. And so, perhaps a few demons managed to come up and do some things, but until sort of the period of total chaos and breakdown where we have the evil presence back, there's an argument that it's a pretty stable system still. There's a real joy to it. The idea that although we don't see it, all of these characters are having to actually deal with the things that are happening in other books, and they're like, wait, over there, this odd thing has happened and it has affected, for instance, some small aspect of my life or some large one. You always wonder, like, has this affected trade? Can they get apples, or there's just no apples in Gotham for a little while because of some supernatural incident that happened in another book?
I know it's kind of a random point, not at all related to what we've been talking about, but I've always kind of wanted to see Lucifer meet up with some of the really big superhero names. I have no stinking idea what would happen, because pretty much anything the superheroes are dealing with, Lucifer could get rid of with a snap of his fingers. And if Lucifer himself is the adversary, then, well, they're all screwed. But it's just interesting to consider what Lucifer thinks of, I don't know, Superman or something. He probably doesn't think much, honestly. It's way below his pay grade, but still, it's something that I think about a lot.
Sure, it'd be great to see them all come into X-Lux, have a few drinks, a little chat. It would be great. It would be a great issue. If they would never let it happen, but it would be great.
I mean, John Constantine gets to go have drinks in there every now and then. It doesn't seem fair that Superman doesn't get to. You guys saved the universe like how many times?
You're absolutely right.
Because I only have a couple of questions left, I'm going to keep fanboying just for a second here, since you did write Lucifer. What would Lucifer's reaction to meeting Batman be, though? I just really want to know the answer to this.
I mean, I think that Lucifer is an observer. I think that what I enjoyed about writing him was that he is always kind of amused by humans and their weird stuff. And I imagine he would find some way to mock him because that's his way of going through the world. And there's a lot to mock. So I think he would enjoy it though. I mean, I think he would, I think he would be really amused to see because, Batman is not your average gentleman. Like he's doing some different stuff. And I think that, I think that one of the things that certainly has made Lucifer really happy not being in hell is seeing sort of the myriad strangenesses of the human world and just the weirdness of people really seems to please him.
Since you brought it up, I have to ask, does Lucifer have a particular thing that he likes to watch in the DC universe? Is there anything specifically that he thinks is interesting? I don't know.
I mean, canonically, he has that really wonderful moment at the end of sort of his Sandman book where he, looks at the sun, the sunset, and he's like, he is really appreciating it and is sort of like, oh, God, this is pretty good. And I think I think the thing that he has is an appreciation for a really interestingly built world, a world that can contain a lot of possibilities. And so I think what he is most attracted to is things he hasn't seen before, things he didn't expect would happen. And, I'm not sure that that's entirely like a particular person doing a particular thing, but maybe a group of like, maybe, I think it's all about for him, that feeling of like, wow, he really, I mean, I'm doing a pretty good job with my creation, but he did this really was an elegantly built world. I got to admit, I got to give it up. There's some nice stuff here.
As the writer, and of course I'm not asking objectively here, but would you say that Lucifer is really a bad guy? Like, how would you, excuse me, how would you describe his morality at the end of the day?
Yes, I would say he's really a bad guy. I think, I think that to me, again, I always come back to, Mike Carey's Lucifer, where he has a moral code. He absolutely can do things that you are really glad he's doing. He, is helping people you really want, to see helped, but he's doing it for his own ends and his own reasons. And you're always going to be brought up short by the fact that you personally, as the reader who are in sympathy with him, are ascribing to him motivations that are not his own. And, Mike undercuts these moments where you are in real sympathy with Lucifer with moments where he is truly cruel. And I think it's really important to remember that he is, I don't think that he, as written by anybody who's written him in the DC universe, is the personification of evil, but he is not good. And he is never going to be good.
Okay, yeah, that's definitely a straightforward answer. I expected more like, well, if you look at his perspective and what he's been through, nope, just cut to the chase. Yeah, Lucifer's kind of a jerk.
Yeah, I mean, I think it is. There's no pleasure in being in writing a Lucifer who is just misunderstood, right? He's done some really cruel things, and I think that's part of who he is, and it's part of the pleasure to me of reading those books is that constant, you are constantly experiencing temptation, right? You want him to be better than he is, and every time that you're brought up short, you remember, oh right, I'm reading about the devil.
All right, so here's the scenario: Lucifer, the one that you've written, actually shows up at your place. You just close the door on him. You don't want any of that.
I mean, he's a charming guy, sure, right? I would, first of all, I'm not slamming the door on Lucifer because it's not going to help. It's not going to help either one of us, and it might annoy him, and I do not want to annoy him. But I'm sure that, he would have a welcome to a lovely cup of coffee, welcome to sit a spell. I have no idea what he would ever want with me. Probably wouldn't be good, but there's nothing I can do about it anyway.
You've read enough books to know this doesn't end well for you.
But I have always known that I'm that character I would never be the protagonist. I would always be the friend that does the stupid thing and winds up, taken away by fairies.
Well, that's okay. As we mentioned earlier, being the protagonist kind of sucks sometimes.
But often at least you make it till the end.
True enough. True enough. Do you have any advice about someone who might be interested in getting into comic books or breaking into the industry that you've broken into? It's something a lot of people on my channel that I know are interested in.
My path is a circuitous path, which is write a whole bunch of novels and then come into comics. And probably is not the most straightforward path. I think, one of the ways in which comics are different from novel writing is that you don't need to be agented to break into comics, and it's much, much harder to break into novels without an agent. So, I mean, I think a lot of the stuff is the same. You want to read a lot of scripts. You want to read a lot of not just finished comics, but unillustrated scripts. You want to write a lot. If you go to every publisher's website, they have a way to submit to them. They have their preferred method of doing that. Go there, look at that stuff. If you can, it's great to go to comic shows because there are editors there, and often there are opportunities to talk to them about what they're looking for. And I think, a lot of people, when they want to get into comics, imagine writing for a particular series or for a kind of set of series. But I would also say, definitely, while you're working on that, work on your original stuff. Tell your own story about your own characters, as well as trying to break in to write for a book. So I think those are, for me, it's not the way I first broke in, but I know a bunch of people in comics, and I think, basically what they did was very similar. They were persistent. They kept writing, they kept submitting, and they kept putting themselves out there.
Well, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate, again, you coming on to speak with me. I know I've already reiterated that several times, but it was a big shock. You're kind of a celebrity to a lot of people. You know that?
Well, thank you for having me. I think that's perhaps an exaggeration, but a flattering one, so I will take it. Anyway, yeah, thank you. Anyway, thank you so much for having me. This was a lot of fun. It was really fun to talk about.
Well, do you have any last things you would like to leave the viewers with? I know it's at the end. No one's probably watching anymore, but if you would like to plug your Twitter, Facebook, mention some new projects you're working on, I'm all ears.
My website is blackholly.com, and my Twitter is hollyblack. I am currently working on a book called The Cruel Prince, which is going to be out January 2018. I don't know. Thank you so much for listening. You're right. This to all of this. It's really it's interesting to get to talk about this because it feels like in some ways insider baseball. Like it feels like the kind of stuff that writers talk about but never get to talk about when we talk about writing, because it's really it's sort of the mechanism stuff. And so this was really interesting for me. I feel like there's the way that stories are made, sort of the engine of the story and the sense making engine of the story is how things work. And so writers alone spend a lot of time talking about this stuff, but almost never get to talk about it in interviews. So I really appreciate actually having an opportunity to do that. I'm a little terrified that I made very little sense in this video, but I hope that you will try and make me have made sense. I put that upon you.
Yeah, I guess just wave goodbye to everyone and we'll awkwardly end this.
Farewell. Thank you for having me.